Okay. Good day, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar on understanding gender based violence, exploring its types, causes, impacts, and prevention methods. So, gender based violence continues to be one of the most pervasive human rights violations across the world, cutting across cultures, communities, and systems as well. And today's session is a meaningful opportunity for us to, deepen our understanding about this topic, not only about what gender-based violence looks like, but also some of the roots causes that sustain it and the lasting impact that it leaves on the individuals and societies, and most importantly, what we can do to prevent it. And we are truly honored to be joined once again by someone whose story and work embodies resilience, advocacy, and transformation, Ms. Petrina Montrose. Ms. Petrina is not just an advocate, she is a force of change. And as a survivor of sex trafficking, she has transformed her lived experience into a powerful platform for education and empowerment. And for past 6 years, she has worked within criminal justice system. She has been mentoring high risk service users, and she has been guiding them towards rehabilitation and reintegration. And her work truly goes beyond support. It's about, restoring these individuals dignity and hope. Ms. Pacino also serves as the expert on experience review panel for the Modern Slavery and Human Rights Policy and Evidence Center, where her survivor insight shapes policies that actually protect victims. She's also a part of the board of advisory at Women Ascension, and she's also a UN Women UK participant, and she combines her expertise in forensic psychology with her unwavering commitment to gender equality and social justice. What personally strikes me the most about Miss Petrina is, and from what I've witnessed firsthand in our previous sessions together as well, is that her authenticity and her refusal to allow misinformation to go unchallenged. She just doesn't speak about change, she embodies it. And today, Ms. Petrina will guide us through the complexity of gender based violence, helping us understand not only what it is, but why it happens, how it impacts our communities, and most importantly, what we can do to prevent it. So, just a reminder, as always, everyone, we'll open the floor to Q&A segment and feedback towards the end of the session. So feel free to take down your notes and prepare your questions as we go along. And without any further ado, please join me in welcoming our speaker today, Ms. Petrina Montrose. Ms. Petrina, the floor is all yours. Thank you so much for being here.
Oh, you're so welcome. Thank you very much for having me. It's an honor. And everybody, can you see me? Can you hear me? And you can see
Yes,
my presentation?
well,
Fantastic.
yeah.
Hello, everybody. I hope you're well. Thank you very much for attending today. So today we're going to be discussing gender-based violence, and we're going to be exploring its types, causes, impacts, and prevention methods. So, gender-based violence is one of the most pressing human rights crises we face today. It includes a broad range of coercive acts aimed in individuals solely because of their gender. Now, gender-based violence is a form of violence inflicted disproportionately on women and girls. Now, while men can be victims or survivors of gender-based violence, this webinar focuses on the experiences of women and girls as they constitute the majority of victims and survivors. So, gender-based violence has gained attention from policymakers and is often seen by the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, the OECD, and the countries as the biggest challenge to gender equality. And these OECD states, they demonstrate their commitments to ending gender-based violence by ratifying international agreements, as you probably know, such as the Istanbul Convention. Now, before I start, it's a very in-depth subject. There's a lot to discuss. please, I would make notes and make questions as we go along. So basically, we have these intersecting social identities, including race, culture, indigenous status, socioeconomic status, age, religion, migrant refugee status, sexual orientation, disability, and geographic location. And they influence women and girls' experiences with gender-based violence. Because of the length of time we have today, I won't be covering everything. So, but these experiences with gender-based violence remain a widespread issue across all nations and socio-economic groups. Also, in crisis and emergency settings, specific forms of gender-based violence are often intensified, and they underscore the importance of um, context-specific interventions. Now, it's gender-based violence is deeply rooted in systems of inequality, and it threatens the fundamental right and dignity of women and girls. And these are just some of the widespread statistics that we have. This is by 2023. We have a global study on the UNODC. They had a global study on homicide, reports that approximately there are 51,100 women and girls were victims of intimate partner or familial homicides worldwide, and these averaging about 140 cases per day and accounting for 60% of all female homicides. And this constitutes a significantly higher proportion compared to male homicides, which make up about 12%. Now, worldwide, there are 736 million women, that's roughly 1 in 3, have endured physical and or sexual violence by an intimate partner or a non-partner, or both at least once in their lifetime. Now, as stated by the World Health Organization and the UN Women, most violence against women is perpetuated by intimate partners, and it involves former spouses or partners, but notably more than 640 million women aged 15 and above, that makes up to 26% of this age group, have faced violence from an intimate partner. Now, there are many recognized forms of gender-based violence, and these are some of them. We have psychological violence, so there's coercive threats, harming mental well-being. We have stalking, there's repeated threatening behaviors causing fear, physical violence, there's sexual violence, that's non-consensual acts such as rape and other sexual offenses, including coercing or forcing sexual acts and causing non-consensual acts involving a third person. Forced marriage, which is compelling an adult or child to marry. We have female genital mutilation, and that's something that is just terrible. And as you can see, we have all kinds of different types of female mutilation, and the coercing or procuring, and the complicitness in this procurement is something that is just, it's really not good. And we can do actually a webinar just on female genital mutilation. So these definitions sort of aim to specify various forms of violence and coercion, and they highlight their nature and the actions involved. We have forced abortion, there's forced sterilization, which involves surgical procedures that prevent reproduction with prior informed consent. The sexual harassment includes unwelcome conduct of a sexual nature that violates one's dignity. And we have crimes justified by honor, which often involve violence rooted in cultural, religious, or traditional norms. Now, digital violence entails the use of digital systems to inflict or threaten psychological, physical, sexual, or economic harm. So these, as you can imagine, are just terrible, and they create a huge burden for us as women. And femicide represents the most severe form of gender-based violence against women and girls. And these murders are often the result of ongoing gender violence across different cultural and social settings worldwide, rather than isolated incidents. Now, femicide is also called gender-motivated homicide, and it happens in both private and public spaces, and it's driven by societal norms and stereotypes that view women as subordinate to men. Now, these motivations stem from structural discrimination social inequality and gender power disparities, and such gender-based motives distinguish these crimes from other murders of women and girls that are not motivated by gender reasons. The global death toll is estimated at 85,000 women and girls who were intentionally killed globally in 2023. And this is an international aggregate that may affect comparability. We do need more disaggregated data and analysis that would show the violence prevalence by age. So, for example, urban versus rural areas, low income groups who face greater barriers to reporting and support. Now, I wanted to share with you this statistical framework here that is by the United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime, and I think also the UN Women in 2022. And I think this particular one is the United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime. And it's for measuring femicide among women and girls. And it categorizes, it doesn't say this here, but it categorizes femicide um, in three types. So we have intentional homicides committed by intimate partners, we have intentional homicides committed by family members, and we have intentional homicides committed by perpetrators, excluding intimate partners and families. So the data quality, as we've discussed, it's aggregated, it's not disaggregated, but from the data gaps to reporting practices, we can see there's variability across these regions. And there is obviously I will keep saying this because there is such a need for disaggregated data. We need to have much more better improved data collection that sort of harmonizes these definitions of femicide, and we need transparency about uncertainty when presenting cross-regional comparisons. So when we look at this slide, we can see that the uncertainty bands in the figure reflect potential estimation errors, and these are arising from imputing missing data at the country level. And these bands should not be interpreted as probability-based confidence intervals. The estimates are derived from the most recent available data, which remains sparse, particularly in regions such as Africa, Asia, and Oceania. Hope I pronounced that correctly. And the width of the error bars reflects the degree of uncertainty associated with regional estimates. So interregional differences in the absolute number of female victims of femicide by intimate partner or family members are influenced by variations in population size. So it's essential to contextualize the scale of the issue through these standardized measures. So I think it's per 100,000 female inhabitants. So it's like in 2023, it's estimated that approximately 1.3 women per 100,000 female population were killed by intimate partner or family member violence globally. And the highest femicide rate, as you can see, is in Africa, it's 2.9 per 100,000, followed by the Americas, 1.6, Oceania, 1.5, Asia, 0.8, and Europe, 0.6. However, it's crucial to recognize that these regional rates may conceal significant sub-regional and national disparities in the severity of lethal victimization. I thought I would share them with you. So, key salient points, the global burden and the regional disparities that we had a brief glimpse of. So there's close to above tens of thousands of femicide victims are estimated in Africa and Asia combined, with indicating a substantial regional burden. And the figure omits non-fatal violence, non-familial violence, and non-femicide homicide that may have gendered patterns. The availability of standardized comparable data for monitoring sustainable development goals targets, such as the SDG 5.2, and for assessing the impact of data improvement in interventions, it is essential for informing policy making. It's crucial to interpret point estimates within their uncertainty bounds to avoid overestimating the precision of these measures. So if you have any questions about that, I'm happy to answer them. I know that may sound quite complicated, but the data is a very big thing here, and we're always looking for more disaggregated data rather than it being aggregated. And we can talk about that if you'd like to after the session. So we acknowledge what the figure emits. So we see non-fatal violence, non-familial violence, and non-femicide, homicide that may exhibit gendered patterns. So when we looked at that, Europe and Oceania carry comparatively smaller numbers according to the estimates, but this does not imply these regions are risk-free. So it's really important that we understand that there is so much underreporting or different definitions, and this may affect the comparability. So the data quality and the uncertainty I would argue, is quite ambiguous. And from the data gaps to reporting practices and the definitional variability across regions, we have to use this disaggregated data, which I've discussed. I'm repeating myself, I apologize. So this is a figure, I hope you can see it, and it's about the intersection between violence against women and violence against women and children. And they're not strictly mutually exclusive. Now, you can have a look at this. I won't read from it from time, but you can see that there's social norms and the intergenerational effects are risk factors, and this is included because of their prominence in research and their importance for interventions and policy, and they transcend simple risk factors. So the evidence indicates that women who have suffered violence during childhood, either as victims or bystanders, are at a higher risk of later victimization through physical or sexual violence. So research on how individual risk factors including childhood exposure to violence and experiences during adolescence and early childhood, interacts, shows additional risk factors such as co-occurring conditions or, the comorbidities such as personality disorders, antisocial tendencies, substance abuse, depression, delinquency, and the endorsement of gender inequitable norms or violent behaviors. And you can see that these have these shared risk factors and social norms, the co-coherence, the intergenerational effects. And if we just look at the intergenerational effects, we can see that the consequences of violence against children lasts into adulthood, that partner violence affects low birth weight, under 5 mortality, children's mental health and social development. Violence against children increases the risk of perpetrating or experiencing violence later in life. If we take a look at the shared risk factors, we can see that we have gender inequality and discrimination. We have a lack of responsive institutions. We have weak legal sanctions against violence. There's male dominance in the household, marital conflict. We have harmful use of alcohol and drugs. Adolescence is a particularly very vulnerable time, and the intersect and violence against women and violence against children intersect at adolescence. And this is, as I said, it's a vulnerable time, and perpetration and victimization of some forms of violence against women often begin in adolescence. And early marriage and child bearing, these risk factors, violence against women and violence against children. So I think adolescence is sometimes overlooked by both fields, but this is a very important area for prevention. And again, we have common compounding consequences. We have mental, physical, and sexual and reproductive health consequences. We also have violence polyvictimization, which may have an accumulative effect and a compounding effect. And the co-occurrence, where we see partner violence and child abuse, maltreatment often occurs in the same family, and children in households where mother is abused are more likely to experience violent discipline. So the reason why, when we look at intersectionality, so this is originating from the critical social theory, this focuses on how these overlapping social identities, gender, race, class, sexuality, disability, and immigration status, and so forth, and these systems of oppression, patriarchy or racism, these create vulnerabilities and marginalizations. It's about how multiple identities interact with unequal power structures to shape experiences of violence. Now, the intersection, the risk factor intersection, it focuses on the combinational effects of modifiable risk factors and gender-based violence research and prevention, and it can be applied within an intersectional frame, but it's not identical to it. So we use intersectionality to identify subpopulations with distinct vulnerability profiles, young women of color in low income or urban settings. We use intersectional informed risk factor analysis to test how combinations of factors such as economic stress, patriarchal norms, prior violence, community norms, elevate gender-based violence risk in these subpopulations. But together, they provide a person-centered framework and they identify at-risk populations and they underlie vulnerabilities, examining how precipitating factors interact to give rise to gender-based violence. And these are some of the risk factors shared in violence against women and violence against children. And these risk factors tend to be more prevalent in societies where legal sanctions against violence are weak, social norms condone violent behavior, and there are substantial disparities in gender rights across social, economic, legal, and political domains. Additionally, inadequate protections for human rights and institutional responses to violence, particularly in communities affected by high levels of criminal violence or armed conflict, are significant contributors. Now, research conducted across high, middle, and low income countries demonstrates that these elevated incidences of child maltreatment and partner violence in families are characterized by some of these risk factors. And these are very important because in the work that I do, we always have to look at the context. And very often, when we make any risk evaluation, we always look at individual, family, community, and societal factors. And individual perpetrators, they have often that you find that they've experienced or witnessed violence during childhood. Oh, there's substance misuse, there can be underlying mental health. So we have depression, personality disorders, antisocial behaviors. Can also be within people that perpetrate violence against women. They can have attitudes that support violence and gender inequality. Within the family, there can be marital conflict, divorce, estrangement. We can see patriarchal leadership, the research shows. We have economic hardship, there can be poverty, destitution, non-biological father figures. We look at our communities, well, these institutions that fail or tolerate responding to violence, they have high levels of armed conflict, criminal violence. There's a lack of services for women, children, and families. We also have gender and social inequality within the community and community norms concerning privacy in the family. And societal, there's weak legal sanctions and societal norms that support violence, including physical punishment of wives, children, and so forth, and social, economic, legal, and political disempowerment of women. Now, a very important part that I would like to do a webinar on just on this and where my research is, and probably a lot of my lived experience is I can talk about is victim blame. And we could argue really, has rape been decriminalized? I wanted to give you, because we're working together, some definitions. They're classical definitions from the literature, because I wanted you to understand rape myths. And these are descriptive or prescriptive beliefs about rape, about its causes, context, consequences, perpetrators, victims, and their interaction that serve to downplay or justify sexual violence that men commit against women. And there was a study, a very famous study, that proposed there's four general types of rape myths. And these are ones that blame the victims or survivors. They suggest that the allegations are false. They exonerate the perpetrator. They suggest that only certain types of women can be victims and survivors. And that means that we have a certain perception of what a victim, a legitimate victim, looks like based on preconceived notions that we have of people when we meet, our own biases and our own prejudices, prejudicial thinking of how we think and perceive of what a victim should look like or behave. Now, there's evidence by the government in 2021 that suggests that rape convictions within England and Wales are at the lowest rate ever, despite significantly increased reporting. So there was a report done in 2019 by the Crown Prosecutorial Services that states that 58,657 allegations of rape were made in March in 2019, while only 1,925 were successfully prosecuted. However, to date, researchers cannot explain why such a low percentage of reported rapes are, not are prosecuted. So research reveals we are witnessing at this present time a backlash against women's rights alongside the emergent phenomenon of these anti-gender movements. Now, this trend underscores the pervasive and systemic nature of gender-based violence, and it highlights its entrenched socio-political underpinnings and the normalization and the perpetuation of such violence across both public and private spheres. Instead, they represent an anti-gender mobilization that systemically normalizes and perpetuates gender-based violence. For instance, we see social media platforms inherently amplifying and normalizing extreme misogyny through algorithms that often embed sexist, racist, and biased content. There's the visibility of this misogynistic internet personalities that we are very familiar with that underscore the influence of what's called the manosphere, which is a complex online space composed of various forums that connect incels, which is men's rights activists and extreme misogynists, as noted in the research here, if you want to go on and read further about this. And this perpetuates gender-based violence and fosters victim-blaming attitudes, and thereby intensifying violence against marginalized groups, including women of color, transgender individuals, and gender diverse people. Additionally, it undermines victims' ability to seek justice by silencing their voices and shifting attention away from perpetrators and systemic causes of violence. And this actually is my story. I have, as you know, I was trafficked at a very young age as a minor, and then I was trafficked into prostitution. But I've been silenced my whole life, and I will carry on to be silenced. I won't talk about what's happened to me. I can explain, and I've researched and educated myself to a place now where now I have a voice. But if you were to meet me so many years ago, decades ago, when I was living on the margins and I was a prostituted woman, you wouldn't I don't even know what you would have thought of me. But nobody would have believed me. I know that. And also, I was very complicit in my procurement. So I never complained. I never really realized that I was being trafficked. But because I had such a low self-worth of my own self, and I didn't see myself as even being worthy of being rescued or even understanding I was being trafficked, um, it silences us. It was only when I spent 15 years of education and finding my voice that I realized, wow, this is what's happened to me. And it made me really angry because I actually can't reclaim back time. And I don't know if all of you have been following this Virginia's Guthrie story, but it was a very similar era and a very similar time to what I experienced. And it was really re-traumatizing to know that we have so much work to do when it comes to the concepts and constructs of victim blame. And this is something that is very, very close to my heart. So we have to challenge these maladaptive gender stereotypes. We have to challenge prejudicial thinking. We have to challenge our own biases and our own preconceived notions. It's not the fact that we don't have biases, we all have biases, but it's what we do to mitigate against them having a negative impact in our professional judgment. And that's our responsibility here in the work that we do, is we treat each person with dignity and the respect and as a sentient being. And this, I've talked about it before, but it's just these invalidating rape victims and these stereotypes about victimhood can hinder access to support for individuals who do not fit the typical narrative of what a legitimate victim looks and behaves like. And we're normalizing sexism. The habitual acceptance of sexist remarks and behaviors, it fosters a culture where gender-based aggression and violence are more tolerated. For example, street harassment is often dismissed as mere flirtation, thereby sustaining these harmful norms and obviously restricting opportunities for women to seek help or it's we have to challenge these maladaptive kind of irrational thinking and around these gender stereotypes because these are deeply rooted in individuals and societal psyches, and they assign people to specific social roles and they limit career progression. And they really do. You know, trying to create when we come into a therapeutic alliance with people that we're helping, we're building a rapport. It's ethical, it's premised on strong professional code of conduct, but we have the highest care that we're giving. One of the biggest things that I find is instilling belief in somebody that change is possible. There is such a pervasive lack of worth. And in women, especially, they can become very disempowered. And it's important for us to harness together all of our collective abilities and the resources we have, and to be able to help people to reach and fulfill a potential. Because what you see is not only do we see limited career progression, but we see unequal pay. We see far fewer women in leadership opportunities for women. We have financial dependence on partners or husbands that reinforce systemic inequalities. And this lack of economic independence makes it more difficult for victims to leave abusive relationships. Now, going to talk about the figure here, this is a figure that is violence against women. It's identified as a top priority area in gender inequality. And I just wanted to show it to you very briefly. And it's a gender equality questionnaire. It's in 2021, and it asks the participants to or adherents to select the priority issues in gender inequality in their country from a list of topics. This is different from policy priorities that countries may have to on work to be undertaken, but it's very important, and I think it really does highlight that we can see at the top here. When we look at the horizontal axis, it indicates the number of respondents. If you look here, you can see there, I'm not brilliant at reading graphs, but the horizontal axis indicates the number of respondents that ranked the issues among their top 3 priorities. And the respondents also had the options of suggesting additional priorities. So these are reported here in the dominate women's safety. The figure represents 41 responses, of which one indicated only priority 1 and 2, and one indicated 2 items. I hope that makes sense. Doesn't really make much sense to me, but you can see that violence against women is taking precedence. We then have the gender pay gap. We have the women's underrepresentation in politics and businesses. We see that gender stereotypes and prejudice, where all my research is and the work that I do takes, is there. It is unequal division of household tasks, women's higher likelihood of poverty, women's lower pensions, and others, and men's lower life expectancy. I don't know why that's there. We'd have to go into more depth on that. I just wanted to show you that just because I just think that that's just showing us where we are when we're looking at violence against women and how it's identified as a top priority area in gender equality. So there are challenges. So in numerous OECD, or the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development member states, the recognition and enforcement of legislation addressing gender-based violence remains inconsistent, despite the existence of international legal frameworks and active civil society engagement. So criminalization of domestic violence exists only in 32 countries, with many legal provisions failing to encompass the full spectrum of abusive behaviors. And similarly, we have legislation concerning sexual assault, harassment, female genital mutilation, and child marriage remains fragmentary and incomplete. So there's an urgent need exists for the adoption of comprehensive legal measures to effectively safeguard women and girls from all dimensions of gender-based violence. Data collection, which I discussed, is critical for informing policymaking and are frequently insufficiently disaggregated by violence type and intersectional variables, which we've discussed. And these impede target interventions. For example, only 13% of OECD countries gather data on economic violence and 30% on psychological or technology facilitated violence. Additionally, we have systemic capacities to address domestic violence and gender-based violence are strained by social justice and health sector limitations, compounded by deficiencies in emergency crisis management frameworks. And despite recognition of these challenges, only 36% of OECD nations have established standalone crisis management plans dedicated to gender-based violence. And I think from my recollection when I was reading and researching, this is out of 58 countries. I'm pretty sure it was so, yeah. So check I've got that, yes. So when it comes to prevention, only 4% of aid is allocated to gender equality programs. And the research is very clear. It shows that violence is preventable with comprehensive and well-funded actions. So preventing global gender-based violence necessitates the implementation of a comprehensive multi-sectoral national action plans alongside increased long-term funding directed towards women's rights organizations. Strategies should address both online and offline manifestations of violence, emphasizing the empowerment of women and girls through education and economic opportunities, promoting gender equality, supporting male allies, and investing in robust data collection to understand and mitigate emerging forms of violence. So here we have, this is by the Equality Institute in 2021. And as you can see, with just 5 years until 2030, ending violence against women and girls holds the key. So to accelerating this much needed progress on the Sustainable Development Goals. And we need action to prevent and respond to violence against women and girls. And it's also central to the response, to climate conflict and humanitarian crises. So at least 14 of the 17 SDGs will not be achieved without the global eradication of violence against women and girls. And the United Nations, they documented a 50% increase in conflict-related sexual violence with women and girls, accounting for 95% of the victims. Projections for 2025 suggest that more than 92 million women and girls will be requiring our support for gender-based violence. And we have prevention methods we can continue with. We can look at civil society campaigns, Me Too, the Nia Una Minios, I hope I've said that correctly, raising awareness and that condemns gender-based violence, including femicide. We have a primary prevention aims to change societal norms and attitudes among women, men, girls, and boys through education. And these initiatives focus on building relationship skills and understanding acceptable behaviors and gender roles. There are multi-agency strategies for investigating and prosecuting domestic violence, and they involve coordination among law enforcement, social services, prosecution and healthcare to improve communication throughout the criminal justice system. So I'm going to leave it there. It's a little bit shorter than what I normally do because I know there will be a lot of questions and there's lots of things to ask. And also it's a very heavy topic and I've given you a lot of information in a very short period of time. What I'd like to ask of you is for me to create this to be more nuanced, if there's particular areas that you would like me to concentrate on or to talk about, that I would be very grateful because then I can tailor these webinars to meet your individuals and collective needs. But thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ms. Petrina, for sharing such powerful and eye-opening insights. The figures and the realities you have highlighted are truly heartbreaking. They leave me questioning what kind of society we have become, that when even our own children are not safe from this violence. And listening to you, it was deeply emotional for me because at one point I genuinely felt tears in my eyes. I
Oh,
genuinely felt them. I mean, it's devastating, but it's also a stark reminder that, why conversations like these are so important for us. We need to confront the truth and then collectively work towards the change. We really do, because it was really devastating. It was really heavy. I mean,
it is. It's a very heavy topic. It is. And thank you for your vulnerability. It is. And that's why it's a little bit shorter than normal because we have to sort of let's see where everybody is, let's see how everybody's feeling, how they're reacting, the questions we have, and then we, but thank you. It we have to collectively, it's everybody's responsibility to fight gender-based violence, and there is so much that we can do by empowering one another, and not silencing victims, believing victims, and raising awareness. A lot of people aren't aware of what's going on. So awareness strategies and interventions are very powerful, like you're
yeah,
doing here on Women Ascension.
yeah. Really, yes, they are. Conversations like these are an eye opener, and this one truly has been. I mean, it's devastating what women are going through all around the world. It's truly it. Yeah. I wish we could help every one of them. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, we can help by, yes, we can help by raising awareness and just, doing everything we can within our own remit, within the places and positions that we are, within our own roles of raising awareness. And there is so many areas of action that we can take. So there's lots that we can do. So it's, and it's all led by having a beautiful heart like yours. So this is where it comes from, is having that level of active empathy and putting that into action. Which is why, I have done what I have done because my life was not a life, it was not a destiny of sexual servitude, or, I would not accept what happened to me when I woke up, when I got educated. I just couldn't accept it. So I fought to re-educate myself for 14 years to this place because I wanted this voice to be heard, and because I have the real understanding and of what that feels like to live in a very gendered, unequal place and in the margins. And it's incredible how mankind inflicts so much cruelty on each other. Humankind amazes me, but humans are desensitized and dehumanized to this level of suffering. And I think what's very important to raise awareness of this is that there's no more going. I would like to think there'll be. I want like to get to young girls so they're not complicit in their procurement. My traffickers were females. I was trafficked to the rich and the elite, which is a lot of information now. But I was still a very poor, socially advantaged girl that was homeless. And, I had all these underlying vulnerabilities that we talk about and this intersectionality. It's very important to take into consideration the context, because very often the context and the risk factors and the intersections can really help us to build interventions and support and to know where to guide people of how to get the best help. It's a collective action. It's not one person, it's all of us.
Miss Petrina, you're really strong. I don't think any of us, I mean, I wouldn't have survived it, but you did. And you're really strong. And, you've come so far, and
Yeah.
yeah, you must be really proud of yourself.
Um,
Mm.
I would not. That's so kind of you to say that. No, I don't feel. I don't. No, I don't feel proud of myself. I feel, I'll always be a lady. I'll always be a woman that has experienced a lot of trauma. I can't escape my trauma, and I have to live alongside of it. You know,
Traumas
I,
don't go away.
no, the scars stay, but
Yeah.
they are appearing more beautiful to me because I have forgiven, and I have forgiven the people that have perpetrated that against me, which was really hard. And I have forgiven myself, for so much time that has been lost and that I did not choose for myself. But I step out of the victimization and I step into this place, and we come together and we see what we can do. And we can do a lot. We can do a lot. I'm very determined and passionate to initiate and make changes. So
Yeah. Katrina,
let's
thank
do
you
it.
so much for that. You
Let's do
know, who come here and talk about it and, inspire others, it's a big thing, and you're doing that, and we are really grateful for it. Truly we
it.
are, from the
Well,
bottom of our hearts.
I'm honored to
And,
be here.
yeah. Some of the questions are coming up in the chat box, and I would read them to you. So there is a question that how do maladaptive gender stereotypes contribute to normalization or concealment of child sexual exploitation and trafficking?
Could you just say that for me again so I can write it down?
Oh.
Maladaptive
Yeah, gender
stereotype.
stereotypes
Yep.
contribute to normalizing or concealment of child sexual exploitation and trafficking.
Okay, all right, just bear with me. Child sex exploitation. I have to write them down, otherwise I won't remember them. Okay, so that's a pretty intense question. So let me break this question down to make sure that I understand before I answer it. So, so the question is asking me about these gender stereotypes, the maladaptive gender stereotypes, and how we normalize them, and then how that leads to child sex trafficking. Is that right?
I believe so.
Okay. So I think for me, the gender stereotypes and the norms are one facet of a multifactorial, different dimensions and different facets and factors that contribute towards sex trafficking. So there has to sex trafficking children and people like myself, we're made, yeah, we're not created just by societal perceptions of these gender norms that are internalized, and then people are desensitized and dehumanized. Traffickers will only exploit vulnerable people. When we looked at the presentation, you can see there's certain risk factors. One of the biggest factors that if you look, is that there's no familial guardianship, there's no parental guardianship. There's parents that very often these young children come from lives of abuse, substance misuse. It's a whole plethora of things that we've discussed and risk factors. So these women and these children are vulnerable, and they're complicit in their procurement, which means that they go with the trafficker because the trafficker knows what to say and what to do and how to behave and how to act. And I'm a little bit confused by the question because I'm trying to work out how they both are associated, because trafficking for the purpose of sexual exploitation is the most predominant form of global trafficking currently. And when I put up, and yeah, they exploit women for other purposes. So I need to, is that answering it? I think they have to be quite clear, the questions, because yeah, because it's not gender norms that cause children and women to be trafficked. Gender norms are what happens in our perception of how we see women and children. It's how we treat women, it's our behaviors, it's how we become desensitized and dehumanized, yeah, of how we see maybe women from very socially disadvantaged communities as, you know, poor people that rich and people can exploit. It's transactional. It's part of it, but it's not the cause of it. Does that make sense?
No, it absolutely does. It does. I'm sure the one who asked the question, they have gotten their answer as well. Yeah. So
I
there
think
is another.
I just add to that. So
Yeah.
I look at the gender stereotypes, they undermine the ability, I think this is a very important point, to identify trafficking victims. So this prevents victims from receiving the necessary assistance and protection services. So stereotypical constructions may result in a reluctance to acknowledge that they are trafficked or they to identify themselves as victims. That is actually crucial. And I could not overemphasize that enough, because looking at the question, when we ensure that response strategies to trafficking are in place, the issue of prevention is always more attention has to, yeah, preventative measures should be strengthened through awareness raising, which we've discussed, and including targeting groups of vulnerable populations. And I think they are the risk of becoming victims of trafficking. So, yeah, I think we should expand our trafficking prevention measures. And we talk a lot about stereotypes and how, does that make sense?
Yeah, I know it does. It does. There's another question, and it is basically about that is emotional torture the same as psychological violence?
So, is emotional torture?
Okay. Yeah, the same as psychological violence.
That's a very, very, very good question. Um, okay, so I would say that emotional torture and psychological violence can be used interchangeably.
Yeah.
Both refer to a form of abuse that inflicts mental and emotional harm. Looking at the question, there are two terms, I guess: the use of psychological manipulation to cause distress, fear or pain. But emotional torture, I mean, this specifically highlights the infliction of emotional pain through mental and emotional abuse. And I think the psychological violence aspect is that it's a broader term, and it looks at it encompasses all forms of non-physical violence, if I'm correct, and that causes psychological harm. So the emotional torture is a severe form of this type of violence. So I would say that they are emotional and psychological abuse. They are mostly non-physical behaviors that abusers use to control others. Does that make sense?
Yes, yes. Yeah, surely it does.
Yes, thank you. It's really making sense. Thank you.
Oh, you're so welcome. You're so welcome. Do you have
So
another?
we can actually say, yeah, that emotional torture and psychological, it's not physical. It can be somebody using abusive words.
Yes,
We
yes,
can
yes,
say that, especially hurting words.
yes. It erodes a
Mm,
person's reality and it replaces with that of their abusers, whereas emotional abuse erodes a person's sense of self-worth and self-esteem. So when we look at the
exactly.
psychological constructs, so emotional and psychological, they're not the same, though they are very closely related, and they're often, as I said,
Okay.
used interchangeably. But it it's the mind, thoughts, and overall mental processes that people that abusers use to psychologically control another. Its emotional health is considered a component of the larger field of psychological well-being. Our emotional health is very important. And yes, you're
Mm,
right. I think another name for
thank you.
emotional abuse is probably manipulation, deception, gaslighting, intimidation.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for
Thank
that.
you. Does that make sense?
Yes, it really makes sense now.
Oh,
Thank you.
thank you.
Okay. So this is the question from my side that, often people think that gender-based violence only happens in certain communities or contexts. So, what are some misconceptions you believe that need to be challenged when we talk about gender-based violence?
Misconceptions that need to be challenged. That's what need to be challenged. Wow. Okay. Um, where do I begin? Right. Uh, well, that's a really, really good question. So I would say that there are lots of harmful and pervasive misconception about gender-based violence that need to be challenged. Then I would say that they come under myths, so which often blame victims and excuse perpetrators, and they prevent victims from seeking help, and they hinder societal progress in gender-based violence. So one of the myths is there are lots of them, but the victim provoked the abuse. The victim blaming myth is completely false. The violence is a choice made by the abuser, and there's never an excuse or any justifiable excuse for abuse. There is another myth that I think that needs to be challenged is that if it was so bad, she would leave. Yeah, something that I'm sure when people were with me, well, you stayed in prostitution for a long time. Why didn't you leave? But people remain in abusive relationships for complex combination of reasons, and they use an abuser or people use coercive control and isolate and create sort of financial dependence. They erode self-worth, they inflict fear, make it incredibly, sometimes quite dangerous and difficult to leave. Um, there are things like also lying, another form of victim blame. Victims often lie about their abuse, and these are false reports of sexual violence. These are extremely rare, by the way, in the literature. When you look at the research there, there's actually, they are very rare and they occur at a very, very low rate as any other crime. But this is a very harmful myth because it discourages real victims from coming forward and fearing they will not be believed. That I would say is endemic, you know, um, and also just yeah, there's also another myth that, which is quite controversial, I guess, but the myth is that abusers have mental health issues. Well, abusers are not necessarily mentally unwell. Abusive behavior is a choice, and mental
Mm,
health conditions are not an excuse for it. And this misconception unfairly stigmatizes people with mental illness. So, yeah, there's a lot we could go on. Does that
I
help?
Yeah, definitely. Now that you've pointed that out, I know the content we consume and we see these themes of gender-based violence in them. And I've seen that, yeah, a lot of them use these myths to cover up or conceal what the abuser has done. So, yeah, they do. Yeah. So, most of them use these myths as an excuse, basically,
Yeah, well,
to justify the actions of the abuser. Yeah.
yes, yeah, that's right. And it's always this underlying vulnerability that the abuser, I guess, is exploiting, It's so, yes.
Yeah. So, Miss Lucy, you had raised your hand. You can go ahead and ask your question.
Okay, thank you very much, ma'am. Thank you very much, ma'am, for this inspiring lecture. Thank you very much. So my question is this, because I believe that gender-based violence is something like stealing that can't end within one day. It just takes the efforts of man, that is continuous efforts, our actions. But like we know, most in my side, most young girls within the ages of, let me say, 14, 12, 14, from 16 to 12 years old, they are being, maybe one of their family member goes to the village and takes them with the belief that they are taking them to the city in order to gain education or advance their self. But whereas they are being sold into prostitution. Children like that, those children within those age, they don't have, I believe they don't have phone or gadgets, whatever, in order to be able to complain about whatever what they are going through, the problems and the challenges that they are going through. It's only left in the hands of, maybe if they are able to meet with a good person that will now, a good man within that prostitution business, that will now remove them from that bad business and free them from that life, take them to education and whatsoever. So, but my question is this: those people within the village, those children, how would they be able to which areas, or how would they be able to speak and stand and say, "Ah, this is what I'm going through"? Who would they ask? Because most of the times these are our governments, they will, it's just mostly words that they are mostly doing, that we are fighting against gender-based violence, but there is no action. They don't even believe them. Most of the time when you go to police, they will say, why is it not that, did you not just, sorry, this might sound rude. Did they force you? Is it not you that open your leg and they put this thing inside? So that's just my question, ma'am. Thank you, ma'am.
Well, thank you very much for that question, and thank you for being vulnerable, and thank you for sharing. Um, so I think from what you're saying, evidence from how I can answer this sensitively, and it may be one that we have to speak about through LinkedIn on my messaging each other privately, but I would say that, you know, sexual violence is widespread in rural villages, and they're a major problem for victims. And in many cases, girls are lured, as you said, from their villages to urban centers, or sometimes even across borders, with false promises of educational work, as what you just said. But combating, and if I'm correct, and I heard you correctly, combating sex trafficking within and from rural communities requires coordinated action at the community, national, and international levels. And it combines what we talk about: prevention, protection, and prosecution efforts. But it's such an abuse of trust, and it's, women and children are disproportionately affected, and factors, as you've mentioned, such as low education. And how do we combat it? Well, I would need to think about that, because obviously there are several international and local organizations that are actively fighting for gender-based violence and sex trafficking. There must be NGOs or some international, I think there's an international justice mission that are partners with law enforcement, and they conduct rescue operations and things. So there are grassroots programs focused on prevention, education, and community. So I know that doesn't really answer your question, but it would have to be about going to you'd have to seek help. That would be what I would suggest. And where that help is would need to be more context driven, of how I would be able to advise you correctly without giving you anything that would misinform and potentially harm. So I think empowering and educating vulnerable communities, if we want to take a stance in strengthening community resilience, that's possible. And all the factors that we're talking about of how we can get economic empowerment, education awareness, and child protection. But how to help is organizations, and I know there are a lot of organizations that have shelters, that have medical assistance, that have psychosocial support. There are aid programs that can help survivors return home and reintegrate into their communities, often with educational and vocational training to build a new life. So it would need, if you suspect trafficking, I guess, or you suspect anything, then there are countries that have national anti-trafficking lines. You can alert, as I said, local authorities or NGOs, but when you come to the psychological one-to-one of how you can stop a woman, that would be something that I couldn't answer here today on this webinar, because it's so complex and there's so many other factors to take into consideration. Does that help? I know that may not have answered it as the answer that you want me to give you, but it is the most safest answer that I can give that can help. I'm looking at it from more of a holistic point of view, but it doesn't take away the severity of the suffering and the trauma and just the barbaricness and heinousness of it all. So I'm sorry if that is skimmed across it a little bit, but I would be, more than happy if there was an area or something that was concerning of how I could look into and help and find response efforts and local authorities or NGOs that, that are reputable, that could work with law enforcement to conduct some form of safety, but that would incur a level of trust and consent, and that opens up something else. Does that help? Does that help you, or has that not answered that? How do you feel about what I've said?
Thank you very much, ma'am. It's okay.
Are you sure?
Yes, it is.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you for asking the question.
Miss Barbara, would you like to go next and ask your question?
Yes, please. Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for this topic. It's quite amazing at how many reflections I've personally made in my community, family members, and other people. I have two. One is a comment and one is a question. I'd like to thank the speaker for mainly talking about the common trend of how people usually relate abusers to. They always think that abusers are they either have mental health issues or actually are mentally ill. And I thank you for saying that not all abusers are suffering mental health issues, and it's just a choice, because there's this trend on social media. You hear names, everyone is a narcissist, they've categorized them, they have ADHD and all these things. Yes, those things exist, but I'm very glad to know that not every abuser is supposed to be given a mental health title. So thank you for that. And so I think we need to look out for symptoms before we conclude on abusers and where they belong. My question is, how can we integrate faith, the different belief systems in our communities, into managing gender-based violence? How can we maybe incorporate leaders? Do they have to? Okay, just tell me about that. In my community, how can I use that? Because there are quite a number of faiths, and that can be a good channel of communication. Thank you.
No, thank you. Oh, wow. That's a great, great question, and one that is very, very close to my heart. So, integrating faith into the management of gender-based violence is well, I'll answer it from a professional. Well, if I've struggled to call myself. Okay, can I answer this from personally and how I would. What would you like first? Would you like me to answer this personally, and then I shall give you what I find from my own work? how would you like me to answer that? Or should I give you both? Would you like both?
I would like both. I believe the rest would like both.
Okay.
Thank
Both is coming. Right. So, okay, let's me do the research side first, and I'll give you my own personal views. So, I would say navigating this dual role that religion can play, and I would argue, and this is probably not research based, but I would argue that religion is a protective factor, and a it's also a potential risk factor for survivors too. So a faith sensitive approach leverages the positive aspects of faith with mitigating harm, creating more effective and holistic support. Now, my goodness, this is so. For me, it's provided the basis. All my healing and all my resilience has come from my faith. So everything as to who I am today is from my faith and from my religious practice. I think for many survivors, their faith is a central part of their identity, and it's a powerful source of strength and comfort and hope during and after, I guess, abuse. But for me, no matter how much I educated myself, no matter how much I tried, I just felt broken. I just couldn't fix myself. And I just couldn't forgive. And I couldn't accept. I guess when I woke up, because and I found I just couldn't accept what had happened to me and how almost 15 years of my life had been lost to that. And I think for me, prayer and meditation and how that's navigated my trauma and how it's rebuilded my lives to so much to the point that I wrote to the Westminster Cathedral here in London. And I told them my story because I had a lot of experiences with faith-based organizations that actually inadvertently re-traumatized me. So they did that because they wanted me to sort of tell them everything about my abuse, tell them everything about what had happened to me. And I wouldn't do that because I didn't feel safe and I didn't feel that faith is with God and I didn't feel that it was relational with people. And that took me on a big journey of running away from faith-based organizations because I felt constantly re-traumatized, but I had a deep longing and calling for God. And I actually wrote to my Westminster Cathedral here. That's, if you know, it's a huge, beautiful cathedral, and they've actually agreed with my son because I have 6 children. And I have a son who's severely autistic with severe learning difficulties, and I'm his main carer. And what happens is I bring him everywhere with me, and I took him to church to pray, and then he became so devout himself, even though he had such severe learning difficulties and severely autistic. And now we are both under the care of this beautiful cathedral, and we're being taught something called the Catechism. And there I found peace in my heart because I could not find peace any other way but with God. And by the grace of God and by the mercy of God, I was able to forgive the people that had perpetrated such terrible, heinous things on me in my life. And I think it does provide a very supportive community. Faith communities often serve as a social network that can offer survivors emotional support and connection with others who share their beliefs. And it can become a vital lifeline, especially when survivors are isolated by abuse. And I think faith-based organizations and communities can provide practical and material support as well, such as sometimes I think there are some churches that have affiliations and they have shelter and financial assistance and legal aid and food. And I think this support system is really, really important. But I think for me, the main thing is it promotes the principles of dignity and nonviolence. You know, many faith traditions, they just are so beautiful that they have this inherent dignity of all people and they explicitly condemn violence and injustice. And I think a lot of religious leaders can use these teachings to challenge and condemn violence against women and girls. But we do have to also be cautious of harmful interpretations and not religious doctrine. So it's not to be used to justify abuse. So, for example, uh, we can't rationalize domestic violence as a means of disciplining, or we have to have sensitive approaches that can work with theologians and faith leaders to promote more equitable interpretation that condemns violence against women and girls. So again, we have to counter, the stigma and the shame, and some religious contexts may stigmatize and shame survivors not intentionally, particularly regarding sexual abuse or divorce. And we need, I think, effective integration strategies to address these issues to help survivors find healing without feeling guilt or fear of judgment. And I think it's not a test of God. I didn't see this as, when I came to some religion denominations, they sort of challenged my passive submission. We go back to this complicit procurement. I never put up a fuss with all the things that I'd experienced in my life. I willingly went and trusted all these people and did whatever that they could do whatever they wanted to me. And this is not a test of God. So countering these beliefs by highlighting scriptural passages or promoting justice, it's not tokenism in engagement, something I'm very passionate about. So engaging with faith leaders, we have to have genuine and equitable partnerships with women's rights groups and with rather than tokenistic gestures. And this is why I don't work with very many people, though I have a lot of unprecedented interest in me, because I am not tokenistic. I'm actually here trying to initiate and work incredibly hard at raising awareness and creating change. And I think this ensures that survivors' voices are prioritized and they're centered. And we just have to look for these true faith leaders. And I have found mine, and I go and I pray every day, and I pray with my son, and I would not know where I was without my faith. Honestly, I would be lost without it. So I hope that answers it. That was a very long-winded way of talking, but that is something that's quite passionate and close to my heart. So I hope that makes sense and you haven't lost the will to live.
Thank you so much.
Okay, so there's another question in the chat box this time, and it asks that how does gender-based violence at home influences a person's self-worth and its relationships?
So how does gender-based violence at home hinder, did you say?
No, I said influence a person's self-worth and relationships.
Oh my goodness, influence self-worth. Wow. Okay. Well, has I think gender-based violence affects self-worth, and I think I'd have to answer this from my own lived experience. I think it's by shaping. I think it just sort of, I just think it impacts self-perception. I think gender roles and societal stereotypes kind of lead to different criteria for measuring a woman's sense of self-worth. And I think it can negatively impact mental health when these standards are not met. So it's just, I would have to really know more, I think. I think when you're talking about, yeah, I think that's a question that I would have to probably, that's quite, I don't know, I don't feel comfortable answering that because I don't know enough about what's happening in the person's life, if that is through their own, maybe something that person is experiencing, or they're writing it from a research stance, or if it's, I wouldn't want to say anything that potentially could, impact without thinking more and expanding more on that question. I can answer it from the influence of gender-based violence from a research perspective, but I'm not sure if that's what's happened. Is that okay? Does that make sense? Or would you, because I think there's gendered expectations that vary across different cultures, time periods, and these intersectional identities. There's so much in that question. I wouldn't like to say anything that could potentially, cause any harm. Does that make any, are you happy with that? Or would you like the question to be asked in a different way that makes me think that you're okay and you're safe?
So she's definitely fine with you having not an answer right now.
Having an answer? Did you want me to answer it?
No, 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 no. She says it's okay. You don't have to.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
Okay. So, Miss Melanie, would you like to go ahead and ask a question?
Thank you so much, Miss Petrina, for this session. Please, I have a question. What are the right words that I can use to talk to a victim? No, let me use the right word, to a survivor of violence. I'm asking this because I have come across so many situations that survivors of violence, they come to me and open up to me. Then I find myself, instead of me to comfort them, at times when they are talking to me, I find myself crying with them, which is not really the best answer. What are the right words when survivors of violence, they come to me to share with me? What are the right words? What can I talk to them? What can I use to encourage them, especially sexual violence? Thank you.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for asking the question. And by the sounds of it, you're doing everything correct. I think when speaking with survivors, and what I'm feeling that you are doing is that you're validating their experiences and you're assuring them that they're not to blame, and giving them, very importantly, giving them control, or giving the person control over their own narrative and over their own path to healing. So the most critical messages, I think, are, I believe you is one of the most important things I think a survivor can hear, as many worry they will be disbelieved. It's not your fault, reiterate that the abuser is solely responsible for their actions. And I'm so sorry that this has happened to you. So you're obviously showing empathy, sincere, you have a sincere expression of empathy because, you're validating their pain. But I think providing reassurance, you're not alone in this is also very helpful, because abuse often involves isolation. So reinforcing connection is very important. You could offer to look into resources for the person, to offer to help them with practical tasks, such as maybe finding a shelter or a hotline that they can speak to and talk to. The communication that you can say that, it's such an honor for a survivor to come to you and to place their trust in you. There is no timeline for healing either. So I think patience with the recovery process is very important. And I think, I think it's very important, which I'm sure you're not doing, that we can sometimes, with the language that we use, inadvertently cause more harm. So it's always good to try to avoid statements that don't question a survivor's choices or their narrative. There are complex reasons why people stay in abusive situations, and these questions sometimes can be, they can be not. They have to be very careful how we say them. I say this because survivors, we have an instinct that is unparalleled to most other people's. We've had to survive and we've had to use our instinct. Think about that. To know if somebody's going to hurt us or how much pain we can actually endure with that person. And we have to be able to be instinctual. So we're very sensitive. And I think sometimes a lot of questions can come across as insensitive and I think it's always best to always just empower and listen and treat which you're doing. You sound like you're doing an amazing job, by the way. And I think, also not, I guess, this too, not to make it about yourself. Everyone's experience with trauma is very unique, and instead, it's very important to place all that validation on the person's feelings, and also not to denigrate. I know this may not make sense. Well, I think not to denigrate the person that's abused them either. I know that may not make much sense, but it's understandable why a survivor may feel very defensive about the person that's abused them as well. There can be trauma bonds that go on there, especially if they still have feelings for the person. And so you need to focus on the experience, not on entering into a narrative where you potentially, you start insulting the person that's perpetrated the violence. But I think healing takes time and looks different for everyone. So a quick resolution can also be very damaging. And I would not offer unsolicited advice either. So the survivor may have very complex reasons for not going to the police or law enforcement. And I think it's very important to respect survivors' decision making. Always give the survivor control by asking them what they need. And this ongoing support involves this very steady, non-judgmental presence over time that builds a rapport that respects the person's boundaries, maintains confidentiality, and also you have to debrief as well. You have to make very clear in any interaction that you have that you may potentially have to use this information if you think the person is at risk of harming themselves or others, and you have to be able to debrief that and use it. So very complex, but you sound to me that you're doing great. I hope that answers some of the questions, but yeah. Does that help?
Yes, ma. I'm so grateful. Thank you so much. It was very helpful. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Ms. Farida, would you like to go ahead and ask your question? Yeah.
Yes, thank you very much. I hope I am audible enough. So thank you, Ms. Patrina. This has been very interesting. It has been very educative, and there's so much to learn from this session. My question, I'm not sure if it can be posed as a question, but so here in where I am, my country, there are lots of gender-based violence, and as we've heard from you and as everybody has witnessed, most of this violence are covered up with the notion that as a woman you should not speak up about these violences. You should just endure them, especially in cases of married partners, where they're being told that you're already married, so there's no need to make such a big deal out of it, and situations like that, basically. And there are very extreme cases of this situation. Like of recent, there's a case that was trying to be reopened rather, of an 11-year-old girl that was molested for 5 years straight by a father and his son, to the point where she had a very terrible vaginal inspection, and she had to live with a diaper till she died later on. A very horrible and extreme case of these violences I mentioned earlier. So most of the time, these things are things that can be deterred. They're things that can be. She could have been rescued at an earlier stage of this abuse if she had someone she could trust, basically, or a community she could trust. So as a person, as an individual, right, I do not have the power to spread an influence that would create a safe space for women or anybody going through any sort of gender-based violence to kind of come to basically seek help. So my question is, as a person that wants to create that safe space or create a community that is a safe space, what are the steps that I can take to open, like to create such safe spaces? Like, what can I do? Should I, sorry, do I need to reach out to organizations to sponsor creating a community? Do I just need to go ahead to just start it, no matter how little it is? Like, what would you suggest as a person that wants to start off creating a community that is a safe space for people that are going to gender-based violence? Thank you very much.
Wow, that's thank you very much for sharing, and that's a heavy, 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 heavy. I'm really sorry to hear that. That's just heartbreaking. Okay. So, how do we effectively protect girls from gender-based violence in the position that you're in? Oh, so I need. So, I think, there would be some questions that I would probably need to ask around that. So, for example, with what the research says of how we can keep girls safe from gender-based violence and then going on to create a safe space for yourself is that we need to increase funding to end violence against women and girls. We need to keep girls in school if that's impossible. I don't know where you're from or where you're living. And we need to, yes, I think I would need to think about that and write to you about that because there is so much in that question. We need to create a safe environment, obviously, by setting clear boundaries and expectations, but I think it's very difficult when you are with I would feel that in order to give you the advice that I would like to give you, do you have are you able to message me privately in LinkedIn into or if you go through Women Ascension, I have an email or contact. I can write you a detailed response to that question, outlining safety measures, safe spaces, and areas that I feel that you could work and help you with. I would like to think about that before I'd answer that because I wouldn't like to tell you anything that could potentially that I haven't had time to think about. But I will come back to you with a very detailed response of how I can help. I know that may not help you now, but I will give you that my immediate attention if that is okay. Because I
That would
think, yeah,
Thank you. Yes, that would help a lot. Thank you very much.
yes. Are you okay with that, Women Ascension, with me doing that as well? Is that okay?
Yes, 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 why not?
Yeah, because I think that
So there is
because if we look at just creating a safe space, there are essential elements that somebody can do to hold a safe space, but it's very different and very complicated when it comes to gender-based violence because we have, using loving, kindness, listening, unconditional positive regard. There's so many things that I could answer that question, but that is such a severe case that I would like to give that my utmost attention and really make sure that I gave the right advice and it was sound and ethical.
yes, definitely. We totally understand that. I believe so. This is going to be the last question, and it was in the chat box. It's been asked that what can women do themselves to avoid and eliminate the gender-based violence?
So what can women do themselves?
Yes, to avoid and then also hope to eliminate the gender-based violence.
Okay, to gender-based violence and eliminate. Okay, okay. So there are lots of things that we can do that we have probably discussed a little bit here. Looking at the question, we can empower women and girls across their lifetime. As I said before, keeping girls in school, empowering women economically, using doing everything that we can. There's a lot of literature on how we can tackle gender inequality, including in the home, so we can provide women and girls with safe spaces. And I think, yeah, I mean, I would say also engaging with male allies. And I think as well, we can do, which I haven't mentioned here today, but there are ways in which women can protect themselves against from gender-based violence. We can and with other women as well. So we can always walk home together. We can keep our eyes on our drinks when we're out in public. If you drink alcohol or not drink alcohol, actually, I don't know why. Check on your friends and make sure they're safe. And these things alone do not prevent sexual harm, but we know that just because you don't do these things, I know just because you don't do these things, may I say, it doesn't mean to say that you deserve to be assaulted. That's certainly not what I'm trying to say. I'm trying to say there are there we if we are the victim or we witness violence, then we have to take that very abuse very seriously. We can take a stand. Yeah, there's so many things that we can do. But to stop gender-based violence, I think, I was going to write about it here. I think the federal government has advanced the work on the development for this national action plan by continuing to engage with a wide range of organizations and experts on gender-based violence. And I think, they looked at strategies. There were strategies and the implementation and the enforcement of very much what this webinar is around. So norms, societal norms, safe environments, parent and caregiver support, income and economic strengthening, and response and support. So what can be done to stop violence? I think we have to, I think it's, we need to adopt always about this. For me, it's always about looking at how we can have educational and economic policies that support families and reduce violence. So mentoring, and education apprenticeship and leadership programs, help people who are at risk of violence find organizations that are understanding and support for trauma. So these are, some of the things. I don't know if that's answered the question correctly, actually, but I think, there's women's rights includes, we can, yeah, there's so much we can do. If you were to ask me what the protective factors are that prevent violence, then I think for me, from a lived experience point of view, there'd be positive self-image, just a lot of self-love and self-worth, and utilizing the help around you and the people around you, and hopefully we as individuals collectively can empower women and use our abilities to resource and rehabilitate and integrate people back into our societies where they can regain some autonomy over their life. And we have to fight for equality. It's not necessarily going to be given to us. We have to fight. But there is so much that we can do Even though violence against women is so widespread and endemic and pervasive, it's also preventable. And the research clearly shows that, is that these prevention approaches addresses the underlying gender drivers of violence against women, and the aim of primary prevention is to stop violence before it happens, and that I think is huge. But I think I'm waffling here. I think, yeah, I think I don't know if that's answered it correctly. I wasn't able to get down the question fully in full. So I hope that's addressed some of those issues. I think that was a bit of a very staggered way of answering that. So I hope that was okay.
No, it was perfect. I believe so. So Miss Petrina, we have, I think, believe so, answered all the questions. And before I conclude the session, what message would you like to leave with those who were listening today?
What message would I like to leave? I think I'd like to leave a message of empowerment. That, you know, we're not defined by our stories, we're not defined by our narratives. We have to, you know, it's everybody's responsibility to fight gender-based violence. Change is possible, you know, it really, really is, with the right help and the right support, and with somebody that believes in you, that is safe in the sense that they are professional, that they are ethical, that they can hold a very safe space. You know, we really can work together to eradicating gender-based violence. It is possible. It will be my legacy that I will do everything within my remit to do everything that I can within my capacity, with the work that I do in raising awareness and the work that I do with rehabilitation, where my real passion is okay, we can raise awareness, but you know, if you come to see me, then I'm going to work with you, and I'm going to do everything within my remit to do everything that I can to make a difference and to make that change possible. And I think if we all have that and adopt that stance, we can do great things together. And just by listening, actively listening and believing victims is the first step, and then we no longer have to be silenced. And once we're no longer silenced, there is a form of liberation and freedom in that, when we're heard and we're validated. So that's what I would leave people with.
Thank you. Yeah, it couldn't be more truer. And yeah, thank you so much, Ms. Petrina, for sharing your powerful insights with us today and your deeply personal experiences with us as well. Your words have not only opened our eyes to the harsh realities of gender-based violence victims, but also they have reminded us that of the strength that comes from, courage, as if they're told, awareness, and then advocacy as well. And what we've learned today was difficult. And but I am sure it was really necessary for us, because it's a call on each of us to reflect on the roles we play, both individually and collectively, and in creating a society where safety, dignity, and equality are not just privileges, but basic rights for everyone. So to everyone who joined us today, thank you so much for being a part of this important conversation. I hope we carry these lessons forward, by speaking up, supporting the survivors, challenging the norms, and also the systems that allow such violence to persist. So once again, thank you, Ms. Petrina, for your time, your honesty, and your inspiration. And to our audience, thank you for your engagement and thoughtful participation. I believe so. Let's continue to raise awareness, foster empathy, and work towards a world free from gender-based violence. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you so much. Thank you.